Hello again, and welcome to the Dr. Hilary Show, a very special Christmas and New Year episode. Coming up, you'll hear from just some of the celebrity guests that joined me in 2024, including Piers Morgan, Richard Madeley and Paul McKenna, plus Impressionist John Culshaw with a cast of his favourite characters. Now, before that, a reminder that the best gift that you can give yourself this Christmas is the gift of good health. There's no substitute for accurate, expert advice, especially with so much medical misinformation out there, and especially since 32,000 nurses could be quitting even before they qualify, since ambulance handover delays in the first 2 weeks of December accounted for a total of 15 years, and since NHS England have even seen fit to issue guidance on providing safe and good quality care in hospital corridors, would you believe? Couldn't make it up. Maybe we can make a difference here, though. Subscribe to the show on my YouTube channel and you'll get up-to-date best medical news and wellness tips every week. Click that subscribe button right now and take the first step towards a healthier, happier you in 2025. Now, we begin with a man who was the editor of News of the World and the Daily Mirror. On TV, he judged America's Got Talent, won the US celebrity version of The Apprentice and hosted his own show on CNN. For 6 years, he was my colleague every morning on Good Morning Britain. I caught up with Piers Morgan in his dressing room before he recorded the latest episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored, his chat show on YouTube. And I asked him how he deals with the stress of his job.
Well, I think you know from when I was with you at Good Morning Britain, I tend to run towards aggro. People say to me, "Are you staying out of trouble?" I went, "Actually, I'm trying to stay in it." So I've always rather enjoyed the rough and tumble of media life. I think that you've got to have a pretty thick skin, which I have. I think I always have a good perspective about life and what's really important. Most of what I do is not that important. Most of what you do is. So there's a clear distinction, I would say, between somebody like you and the advice you distill over the airwaves and someone like me, where I'm just effectively giving opinions that aren't going to affect people's lives. But, look, I embrace freedom of speech and people's right to have opinions. And I will defend that till the day I die, because I think without that, then society loses something. And so if I am considered to be a bit of a standard bearer for at least having the right to express your opinions as stridently as you like, I'll take that.
I always remember you saying to me, there's no point being in the media to be bland. And you're certainly far from that. Do you get it?
I don't think being boring is the enemy of the media. You've got to have your own thing. And I think also being authentic, being true to yourself. As I think you will attest, I'm pretty much exactly the same off air as I am on.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen your sensitive side. You're genuinely, I have, you are.
Hang on, don't ruin my brand now.
You are a friend of the little people. With Captain Tom, you were wonderful. You paid some of the nurses parking fines, as you promised to do during COVID. That's a side that a lot of people don't see. As a mate of yours, it's nice. Do you ever get any physical symptoms of stress? Palpitations, not being able to sleep at night, anything like that?
I think I remember as a newspaper editor in particular, when there were massive stories breaking, 9/11 and the weeks that followed that, or the Iraq War, when we were sending obviously troops, including my brother, into combat. Huge stories when I was at CNN. I can remember anchoring at CNN the night that one of the hurricanes, Hurricane Sandy, swept through Manhattan. And the tower that I was in, one of the biggest in Manhattan, began to actually sway, which it was designed to do in a hurricane. But half of Manhattan, the power went down, and the other half was rocking from side to side, including the studio I was in. So that was pretty stressful. But I never feel probably the same way about these things that other people do. I like to feel slightly on edge. I like to feel the adrenaline pumping. I think I'm a better broadcaster in a live environment when all hell is breaking loose than I am when I have too much time to think about stuff. When I've had to pre-record things, I never feel I've got the same energy. So I think that when you're in the game that I'm in, which is news and current affairs and stuff like that, I think having that adrenaline rush is actually a good form of stress. But what I try and do to mitigate the kind of genuine stress that comes with it, because it can be a stressful job, is I try and keep reasonably fit. I go to the gym a couple of times a week. I do a bit of Peloton. If I'm in my home in LA, I swim every day quite a lot. I play a lot of golf. and I try and just stay in reasonably good condition. I could be a lot healthier if I gave up my adoration of fine French wine and French cheese, but you got to have I think you would say a lot of stuff in good stuff in moderation. I would say I like to occasionally have a lot of good stuff with no moderation whatsoever, but I'm reasonably abstemious in between.
That's good, and you look very well on it, I must say. Have you had any big, significant medical issues in the past?
I think probably the most serious I had was when I got COVID in 2021. I got it at the European Championship final, the last one, when England played Italy, and it was chaos in that stadium. You might remember, with thousands of people getting in with no tickets, and it became a massive super spreader at a time when COVID was pretty bad. I got the Delta variant, and I did feel very rough, I have to say, for that week. I had fever of about 103.4 for 7 days, which is not good. And then I got long COVID, which was one of the worst things I've ever, probably is actually the worst health thing I've had to deal with, because I've broken lots of bones. You know, the Australian fast bowler, Brett Lee, in a cricket net, broke my ribs, famously on national television. I broke 5 ribs and collapsed a lung falling off a Segway in Santa Monica, which was just embarrassing, never mind anything else. I broke 3 ribs tripping up going to play one of my sons at tennis in Antigua. So I've broken a lot of ribs in my time, and I've had all the usual run of illnesses, but long COVID was particularly debilitating. For 7 months, I had no taste or smell at all, and I had about 20% of my normal energy. And the really sort of psychologically difficult thing about that was I had no idea whether it would ever end, or whether that was now going to be my life for the rest of my life. And no doctor could tell me. Doctors still don't really know what causes long COVID, or what it really is, or why it affects 15% of people who get COVID and not the other 85%. But it was, they were tough weeks to deal with, when you wake up with a foggy head. That's how you stay all day. You've got no real energy. Any exercise would knock me out for a whole day. And I couldn't taste my favourite wine, Hilary. The sacrifice was real.
That's terrible. But you're over it now?
Yeah. Funny enough, it was a weird thing where I suddenly flew around the world twice, literally. I went from London to New York to LA to Florida to Honolulu to Sydney to Dubai to London, to New York, to LA, to Florida, and back to London, all in 5 weeks. And that is a kill or cure, I would say, for almost anything. And it turned out to fix my long COVID. And there is a theory, one of the many theories about long COVID, that it's to do with microclotting on your lungs that doesn't show up in normal testing. And, my mother reminded me, and you might remember this because you're obviously old enough, despite the fact you look about 30, that apparently in like the 60s, they used to put people up in planes, kids who had really bad whooping cough, because they felt the altitude might help them. And it used to, apparently. And I do wonder whether my long COVID, and I would say, I've said this to everyone who's had persistent problems with it, try flying a bit, because it's definitely, either it was a massive coincidence, or after flying around the world twice, it went.
Piers Morgan on his unconventional cure for long COVID. Another occasional TV colleague that joined me was Richard Madeley, a presenter who arrived on TV screens in 1988 when he launched This Morning on ITV alongside his wife Judy Finnegan. In 2021, he appeared on I'm a Celebrity, but left on day 5 due to health reasons. I asked him to tell the story of what happened.
It turned out to be dehydration, which I am prone to. I had a sort of, I suppose, what you can best describe as a funny turn in my sleep at about 4:30 in the morning. I think we'd been on our feet for about 20 hours the previous day. And for various reasons, I hadn't drunk very much water. We only could drink out of our water bottles. And the only tap available, because they make things difficult for you in the castle, was at the very top of the castle. And I remember getting to bed, and we don't have watches in doing I'm a Celeb, but I knew it was sort of pretty much in the small hours of the night. And as I snuggled into my sleeping bag in this freezing castle in winter, I thought, I really do need to get a drink of water. My water bottle was empty. But the tap was at the top of the building, and it was going to be a cold, freezing plod. I thought, never mind, I'll do it in the morning. Anyway, I kind of came to with concerned sort of campmates around me saying, "You all right?" An ambulance was called, and I sort of felt a little bit woolly-headed, a bit confused. And I was taken to the local hospital, where they obviously examined me straight away. And it turned out I was incredibly dehydrated. So they rehydrated me with a drip. And I drank a lot of water. And literally half an hour later, I was seeing a consultant. He said, "Well, you're fine. That was the issue. Make sure you keep hydrated. You're fine to go back to work." But I couldn't go back. So it looked more dramatic than it was, because I'd broken the COVID bubble.
Yeah.
I wasn't well enough to go back. I was fine, but I'd broken the COVID bubble, so I couldn't go back in case I infected the others. So I had to come home, which is a big disappointment because I'd had a really good fun doing that first week. But since then, I've been very careful to drink lots of water during the day, and I always have about half a litre just before I go to sleep, which means I wake up to have a pee, which is annoying in the middle of the night. But it hasn't happened since.
Richard Madeley with a stark reminder that dehydration can occur within hours if you don't drink enough fluids. Always remember to drink water regularly throughout the day, not just when you're thirsty. Now, Tony Blackburn is another household name who joined me in 2024 to chat about his long career and his health. Tony shared how he could have ended up working in medicine rather than radio.
For my dad, he was one of the old-time doctors, and the phone used to go in the middle of the night, and he would go out and visit a patient in those days, And he was a doctor that could do minor operations as well. He was a GP. But my mother was a nurse, and my aunt was the worst physiotherapist I've ever known. She was dreadful. But I didn't want to go into the medical profession, really, although my dad was a great doctor. But I was always more interested in music, and I loved radio and television right from the word go. So it was a profession I admire it, but I wouldn't have wanted to go into it. No, I don't like the sight of blood.
Well, that's not a great advert, but it's very strange because my dad was a GP and my mother was a nurse, and perhaps I should have taken a leaf out of your book and avoided a career in medicine. I did all the wrong A levels, and then I converted to medicine thereafter. But yeah, it's certainly had its challenges. So, looking back in your health, your personal journey through the years, have you had any serious health issues yourself?
Yes, I have. I had I had yellow jaundice. I had that, whooping cough, which we used to get in those days.
Back on the rise again now.
I had a thing called, which you will know, erythema nodosum.
Yeah.
I had that for a time, and I woke up on Radio Caroline and couldn't really move very well. So I was on steroids for a year. And recently I suffered from, sciatic nerve problems. An absolute mess, aren't I? But it hasn't been too bad. It's something I can control. Now the sciatic nerve, I think it was about 3 years ago, I could hardly walk. But then I had an injection in the back, which you'd know about, and that put me right. And then, of course, I had sepsis last year. That was a bit touch and go because I had bacteria went into the heart. So I was having injections every 4 hours. But at the moment, touch wood, everything seems to be in working order as much as it can be when you're 81.
And for 81, he's not doing badly at all. My thanks to Tony Blackburn. Now, Frank and Christine Lampard have 2 children under 5 and busy lives. I spoke to Christine in the summer since then. Frank has taken a new job as head coach at Coventry City. In 2010, despite a childhood fear of water, Christine took on a challenge for sport relief in the English Channel, raising hundreds of thousands of pounds for charity. So I asked her how that idea came about.
Oh, I get flashbacks of fear and pain when anyone asks me that still after all these years, Hilary. But it was for sport relief. And I had gone to Uganda with sport relief to film a couple of these pieces that you see on the show on the night about, what the charities do for various people over there and how it helps so many people. And when I came back, I thought, I want to be one of those people. I want to do something. I want to try and raise money. And so anyway, someone suggested, what about water skiing? And I had never water skied. I can't really swim, to be honest. I can, do a kind of doggy paddle, but that's it. I'm not, going to fix anytime soon. But I sort of foolishly and ignorantly thought, water skiing looks okay. Once you're up, you kind of float. It obviously isn't that. And so we did, in the end, after about 6 months of hardcore training in the winter, in the rain and the cold and the ice, I got the wetsuit on, and it was 24 miles of the English Channel. At some points as well, I couldn't even see the boat in front of me because of the swell. It was just petrifying. I fell about 5 or 6 times, and they said if you fall any more than 3 or 4, will not the energy to finish it because it was so intense trying to get back up in the waves. But we did it, and I still cannot believe it to this day. But I've got strange muscles that pop out of my arms still from the training. And I put on about 2 stone in weight when I was training for it. It was just hard muscle. And I needed it to get across. I mean, sadly, my bum doesn't look the way it did right then, but I was in fairly good nick just from training so hard. But we raised like 1.5 million, I think it was, in the end. So it was all completely worth it. But the sense of responsibility when you were doing it, you think, oh my gosh, I'll be the first one that does a challenge and can't complete it. How devastating will this be? But we managed to do it, and it was an extraordinary moment in my history, that's for sure, because I'm not a big physical sporty person. So yeah, it was something else. I get to show off still on holiday occasionally.
Well, absolutely.
Go, yeah, I can water ski.
That's an extraordinary achievement. It's absolutely brilliant. I once harboured an ambition to windsurf the channel. I never got round to it in the end. But
well, Hilary, if I can water ski, you can do that. Trust me, anyone can do anything if I did that.
Anyone can do anything is something that hypnotist Paul McKenna would no doubt agree with. Paul's books have sold more than 10 million copies and have been translated into 32 different languages. And he's helped millions of people to break bad habits and change their lives. When Paul stopped by the studio, I asked him if he could hypnotise anyone.
Oh, I've never found anyone who can't be hypnotized. I've found people who can't be cured, and it's a different thing, or successfully treated. But see, hypnosis is a natural phenomenon. I believe there's basically, when people say what is hypnosis, there's 3 schools of thought. One is it's a special state. One is that it's nothing more than social compliance with the hypnotist, and the third is there is no metric for what normal waking consciousness is. So how can you possibly say what hypnosis is? So I say they're all nice theories, but who cares? What I'm interested in is the output. And generally, hypnosis is, and I'm about to use a scientific description, the loss of the multiplicity of the foci of attention. So right now, I'm thinking about lots of things. And when you're hypnotized, you tend to focus on one thing to the exclusion of others, right? So it's a bit like when you watch television. You forget about the room, the carpet, the curtains, and you suspend disbelief. And if something exciting happens on the screen, you get excited. Something romantic happens, you feel romantic. So hypnosis, in a sense, is a lot like that. It's like concentration, and the hypnotist takes you on a journey and generally gets you to imagine a better, richer life, but also can communicate with your unconscious mind. And so the conscious mind is the mind we actively think with, the one that we chatter away to ourselves with all day long. The unconscious mind is the larger mind. It regulates our breathing, our blood supply. Also, as I'm thinking about the sentence I'm going to say to you, it's organizing the syntax. About half what we do each day is a habit, so we don't think, shall I tie my shoelaces today, or shall I? We just do it, yeah? And so the unconscious is running those habits as well. And some habits are functional, like, knowing how to shake hands or open a door, and some are dysfunctional, like smoking or overeating, etc.
Paul McKenna. Once again, you can watch that full interview, including the story of how he cured a famous rock star with a fear of flying, on my YouTube page. Now, Parkinson's disease is the fastest growing neurological condition in the world, and currently there's no cure. 1 in 37 people alive today in the UK will be diagnosed with Parkinson's in their lifetime. Currently, there are around 153,000 people already living with the condition. Rory Cellan Jones was a familiar voice and face on the BBC for 40 years. He now hosts the hugely popular and award-winning Movers and Shakers podcast with fellow sufferers of Parkinson's disease. We had a long chat about how he manages his condition, and I began by asking him how he felt when he first received his diagnosis.
It was a blow, and when we get together, we Parkies, as we call ourselves, we compare notes on our diagnosis. For a lot of people, it was worse than me. For one thing, I'd kind of known it was coming. The previous summer, I'd been on holiday with my wife. I'd been dragging my foot, and she kept saying, "Pick your feet up, man." I went to this physio that I knew because I used to run a bit and he used to look after me. And he must have known because he said, "Oh, I think you need your GP for this one." So I already suspected it. Then somebody had written into the BBC. I'd done some live broadcast holding a broadband cable on the island of Jersey, which is amazingly wired up. And my hand had been shaking. Somebody had written into the BBC saying that man should see a neurologist.
Interesting.
And I had actually done a story about a Korean company teaming up with a London company to use AI to detect Parkinson's. And I'd gone along to film, and they were to do this. They were filming somebody doing this sort of exercise with their hands, and I sort of mentally began doing that, thinking, "Oh, I find that difficult." So it wasn't a great shock. And the other thing was I'd had a medical history with something which I regarded as far more frightening. So 20 years ago, late 2004, early 2005, I was diagnosed with a malignant melanoma behind my left eye, a cancer. It's a very rare cancer.
Yes.
And I'd been treated for that, and that can have a very poor outlook, but it's had a good outlook for me. So
yeah, well, that's interesting because most people think of a malignant melanoma as being on the skin, but you can get it anywhere in the body, even internally, very rarely. I think Bob Marley had a malignant melanoma which killed him, started on his big toe.
Oh my God, yeah.
But what you describe as the first symptom of Parkinson's disease, that shuffling gait, as we call it in the medical profession, and I believe Billy Connolly was also diagnosed in a very similar way.
what an honour to share a symptom with Billy Connolly.
There you go. He was in an airport and somebody said, I've seen you going to get that coffee and I think you should see your doctor. So this is not an unfamiliar thing when medical people see somebody on television and contact them and say, I think you should see somebody about that. But every individual with Parkinson's disease might have a different presentation. So it might be the shuffling gait or the very small handwriting, which gets smaller and smaller. But often it's a tremor, often starting in the hands. Sometimes it's just rigidity of posture. Do those symptoms sound familiar to you?
Oh yeah, I've got all of them.
Have you?
Yeah. I mean, I've got a tremor. It's very much on my right side that's worse, and I've gradually. None of it seemed too bad at first for the first 2 or 3 years, and then I saw myself. I was doing a piece for the One Show. And I was filmed doing that walking you have to do on the telly from time to time. And you don't normally think about how you walk. And looking at it back, I thought, who's that shambling old fool? And it was a bit of an eye-opener that I did have that stiffness of gait, that sort of shuffling motion. And in a weird way, seeing it about 18 months ago has sort of woken me up to the fact, and it's become much more obvious that I do have those mobility issues.
And when you were first diagnosed, and when you see yourself back and are surprised by what's happening to your body, how do you cope with that psychologically? How do you think about it and deal with it?
Well, it's an interesting question because looking back, I realised that I had another symptom of the disease, depression, for about the first year.
Which is common, of course.
Yeah. And then, funny enough, when we went into lockdown a year later for COVID, I suddenly snapped out of it and got a renewed sense of purpose because I was having to broadcast from home, from my loft, and, there was...
Like everybody else.
Yeah, things to distract me. I mean, I suppose I'm unusual in that I spend an awful lot of time thinking and talking about Parkinson's because I'm involved in this podcast and hearing from so many other people who got it. So what's good, I suppose, is in a way, is that I see that my path is reasonably good compared with some people. I mean, yes, I'm worse than I was 5 years ago, but I'm coping pretty well with most aspects of life.
You can find out more about the Movers and Shakers and the Parky Charter at moversandshakerspodcast.com. Now, in November, MPs voted to give people in England and Wales the right to choose to end their own life in certain circumstances by 330 votes to 275. Several proposals have been presented over the years, but none have passed into law until now. A few weeks before the vote, I spoke to Dame Esther Rantzen's daughter, Rebecca Wilcox, and asked whether her mother was interested in the assisted dying debate even before she became personally involved.
It's interesting that when you have a personal involvement with something like assisted dying, your focus becomes so much more acute. So I think she's always supported the right for choice. She's always been about everybody's right to choose in whatever circumstance it is. But I don't think it had really hit her radar with such force as it did when she realised she had her own terminal diagnosis. As you know, she's had so many campaigns that she's been a part of in her life that it almost feels that you're spread too thin to look at yet another thing. And when that thing comes crashing into your space, into your personal life, into your brain, into your body, you can't help but take notice. So she is much more focused on it than she was before. I've always known that she wanted choice. I've always known that she didn't think that a long drawn out death was humane. And my dad completely agreed. He had a DNR, and in the hospital when he was dying, I had to scream at the nurses, he has a DNR. I mean, it's one of those situations that you don't necessarily want your loved one to die, but you absolutely don't want them to suffer. So she's always been behind that campaign, but it's never been her focus like it is now.
And what is it she wants to achieve above all?
Choice. She just wants everyone to have freedom of choice. She is incredibly proud of the fact that she has been able to change laws in the past, been able to change acceptance in society. Now she wants people to see that it is actually the kinder decision to say, if you are going to suffer this terrible death, you can choose another way. You do not have to fly to Switzerland at great cost to yourself financially and emotionally, because you'll probably go away, but also to your family when they return and face possibly 2 years prosecution. So at the moment, she wants the law to reflect a clearer direction that would involve choice. At the moment, it is a mess, and she calls it a cruel law because people don't necessarily know what they're allowed to do. The BMJ is unclear about what doctors are allowed to do, whether you're even allowed to sign people off to go to Switzerland. There doesn't seem to be a clear, focused way that allows people to choose to live the whole of their life out with palliative care, or to take that final end and shorten their death. Because as we keep saying, this is not about shortening your life, it's shortening your death.
Well, I think the most poignant interviews I've ever conducted during my career is on this very subject. And I asked you kindly to put some questions for me to your mother, and you kindly did that, and we're going to hear them now.
Well, I want you to have happy memories of me. And I know that if you have a memory of me suffering at the end, that can actually overwhelm other happy memories. So that's what I want. And also, I'm a bit of a performer, so I'd rather go out when, you still want me, rather than you think that the end is a relief because it's been horrible for a period of time before that. So that's what I want.
There is no circumstance on earth when we wouldn't want you, other than if you don't want to be here. What law change would you most like to see enacted?
At the moment, I think Lord Faulkner's Private Members Bill is a very good way ahead. It's quite narrow. It says assisted dying should only be available to people who are terminally ill with 6 months or less to live and are in charge of their own decision making. So I think that works. So it's certainly, an easier step forward than to try and do anything more general, which I don't think the country wants.
How frustrated do you feel that there is such resistance and fear of allowing people of sane, rational mind to determine their own death?
Over the years, I've got very used to people having strong feelings that I don't share. And, for example, religious feelings, as you know, I am an agnostic, so all religions are equally mysterious to me. I don't share any of the various faiths. In fact, I think a definition of faith means that you believe something for which there's no evidence, which I don't think is the way I want to work. So people with strong religious feelings, I know that I will disagree with on various grounds, and this is one of them. I am sad that people in the healthcare profession, some of the palliative care professionals, don't want to change the law because they think it will damage what they do. And I hope that they will all read the very good report by the Select Committee, the Health Select Committee, who gained evidence from countries where the law has been changed, some of whom say that actually the effect has been to make palliative care stronger, to enhance it. So I'm sad if, without evidence from abroad, they still worry about that. I fully accept that nobody should be pressured into assisting someone to die any more than anyone should be pressured into having assisted dying. It has to be a matter of personal choice.
So the final question, too many people are forced to die in pain or discomfort because of antiquated attitudes to assisted dying. Are we worse off than a sick animal in that regard?
Well, as you know, our dog had a very, very easy, quick death because we assisted his dying. He was terminally ill. He did have cancer. He wasn't aware of that. And he died peacefully surrounded by people who loved him, which is, I think, an ideal. And many pets are allowed that. In fact, if you allow pets to suffer, then I think actually you can get prosecuted for it. So, yes, the law at the moment does protect our pets possibly better than it protects other people. And I think the time has come for everyone to recognize that there was a time, I think, when doctors used to quietly ease people out of life when life became intolerable. I think since the Shipman case, it's become much more regulated and much more difficult. And I think we need to accept that some people will need medical help to leave life at a time they choose.
Dame Esther Rantzen and her daughter, Rebecca Wilcox. In December 2020, during the third lockdown, Scott Mitchell was visiting his partner and wife of 27 years, Dame Barbara Windsor, who was in a care home suffering from dementia. She died in December that year, and since then, Scott has worked non-stop to raise awareness of dementia and raise funds for research in her memory. He's the People's Champion for the government-funded Dame Barbara Windsor Dementia Mission and an ambassador for Alzheimer's Research UK. In a wide-ranging conversation, we talked about Barbara's life and work and the difficulties they faced coming to terms with her diagnosis.
One of the hardest things from people I speak to around the world of dementia is getting someone to go and have an assessment. Yes. Because, as we say, no one wants to even go there in their mind.
There's fear.
Yeah, and it's something that you've got to be so sensitive about when you're talking to your loved ones. Who wants to say, I'm a bit worried about your memory? It's a hard thing to tackle.
But you've been married 20...
We've been married, well, we were together for 27 years. Right. We were married for 20 of those. Yeah. She did come willingly.
And you knew her better than anybody.
I knew her. I knew Barbara inside out.
And she trusted you.
She trusted me, absolutely. We went along. We had the first assessment. That was followed up with some cognitive tests and a brain scan early on. What he said was, after that initial brain scan, he said, I think there's something going on. He said, I can see a little bit of, certain areas where we may have something happening there. never said what it was, and we never kind of asked the actual question.
Right.
And this went on for another most likely 18 months or so to 2 years before the final diagnosis was given, which was more scans and also finally a lumbar puncture, which was the defining diagnosis.
And I remember at the time when you went public with the diagnosis, you know, it was a headline story on every tabloid, you know, and broadsheet, wasn't it? I mean, people were, oh my goodness. You know,
it really was, because this was 4 years after her diagnosis, and it had got to the point where the symptoms were now becoming very obvious, especially when we were out, you know, and people still came up towards her. And she'd asked people the same thing within, you know, if we had a 3 or 4 minute chat, she might ask them 2 or 3 times where they live. So it was becoming very obvious that something wasn't quite right. And I always remember there was this one lady that this situation had happened where Barbara had repeated herself to this family that had stopped us. And I just remember this lady walking away, and before she walked away, she looked at me and she just gave me this very compassionate nod, and I thought, she knows. She knows we're at that stage now. So her neurologist said to me, "We need to talk to Barbara because I don't think you're going to be able to keep this private for much longer." Plus, there already had been an approach from one of the papers a couple of years before to say that they'd been told somehow. We don't know how.
Was that more difficult, you know, being in the public eye? Was it more difficult to know how to deal with it? I mean, other people would keep this fairly private. They'd make little arrangements in their social life, but that must have been very difficult to do.
It really was. I think that was kind of a much more an extra pressure that I was carrying around with me, and because so few people knew about it within our close circle, maybe a few family members, 1 or 2 friends that I'd confided in to talk about it. So I was carrying a lot of that. The relief when we did do it, and we spoke to Barbara about this first, and we said to her, "Look, Barbara, this memory problem, it's getting worse now, and it's very hard for us to keep this private." My way of getting through to Barbara was to tell her that she was going to be helping people. She'd always helped people as much as she could. She'd done all her charity work, and she always used to say, "Well, if I can't give 2 minutes of my time to help others, you know, who am I?" And that's how I got through to her. And I remember her look, and you know, I looked deep into her eyes and I said, "Bar," I said, "you have no idea how you will be helping people if we talk about this." I said, "Because lots of people have this." I said, "and a lot of people are scared to talk about it." And she went, "All right, love." I mean, the irony is, I remember like literally within 10 minutes when he'd gone, she said to me, she just agreed to it. And she went, "Don't you let anyone know I'm not well." I mean, that's the nature of dementia. You know, that's when you have to see that side of it. But in that moment, Dr. Hillary, I knew she had taken that in. And that's how I made the decision to go with it.
Do you think she recognised what was happening to her?
She did as it progressed. She did as it progressed.
Intervals of lucidity where she knew what was going on.
Absolutely.
And was that an emotional moment? Did she become emotional?
Very, very emotional. That was the other thing. You know, from early on, actually, Barbara's emotions were very heightened. Very heightened. She wasn't someone, I'd say, that was generally someone who would get over emotional about things, but certainly once this set in, I mean, I can just remember her, I mean, sobbing and sobbing endlessly. And I used to say to the neurologist, I just don't know what to do when she's like this. So, of course, there's that point that affects some people like that. As you will know, everyone with dementia has a different journey. And I often say I do a lot of talks about caring for someone with dementia. And I always start by saying, look, I may say some things about what happened in our journey. Please don't be alarmed by that, because it may never happen to you or your loved one. And I think that's a really important thing to know. But with her, yes, emotionally, she did become easily upset.
I'm sure.
And in all different ways, whether that could be temper, You know, she could suddenly change and get upset very quickly. Things that I didn't realise, things I had to learn on the job, which most carers do, because you know very little about dementia. You know, I knew very little. I knew it's to do with memory loss. I didn't know about all the other things that would be affected. I didn't know her mobility would be affected. No. I didn't know that her hearing would be affected. It was highly sensitive, her hearing.
Was it?
Yeah. If I would have, you know, for instance, you know, you're loading a dishwasher, sometimes you drop a fork. The reaction that Barbara would have to something like that was extraordinary. She would leap out of her seat and I'd kind of be shocked and look around and say, what? And she said, that noise. So obviously there was something in her hearing that was echoing.
Yeah, so the senses
must be very affected. The same with touching. If I walk past and accidentally brush against her, she'd go, ah! So, you know, there were all these different things I had no idea.
You were learning things all the time.
I really was. And that's been my main thing about, you know, how people cope with caring.
That was Scott Mitchell. For help and advice on coping with dementia, go to alzheimersresearchuk.org. Now, for more than 20 years, through the 80s and 90s, Matthew Kelly was Mr. Saturday Night, appearing on shows like Game for a Laugh, You Bet, and the iconic Stars in Their Eyes. On stage, he won the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Actor in 2004 as Lenny in Of Mice and Men, and he's played leading roles in several major productions. We talked about his TV and theatre career and, of course, his health.
I had a terrible problem once with my neck and my shoulder, really bad. And it lasted for about a year, and I didn't know what to do. I went to osteopaths, I went to chiropractors, I went to everything, as you can imagine. And I finally went to one who worked at Guy's Hospital, and she put me on it was medieval, this thing.
Traction.
And it pulled my neck, and there were weights on the back. I thought, do you know, I went to sleep like that.
You're going to be 6'5" again.
And I went, I mean, this was years ago, but it was fantastic. So I'm up for anything that's going, to be honest with you.
No, I think if it's reputable and it's got some proof behind it, it's worth having.
And also if you believe in it, I
sure.
think, as well.
Usually it's safe. You know, I mean, pharmaceutical medicine's very, very good, but you know, they're also capable of causing side effects.
Oh, I'm all for chemical assistance at all times. Oh, yes.
Do you take any pharmaceutical medicines?
Do I? Not. Oh, yes, I do. I take a very small amount of a thing called amlodipine, which is for blood pressure.
Yes.
But I've given up all kinds of smoking, which I was a massive fan of. I smoked for 60 years. And I've also given up drinking. Oh. And that's made a massive difference as well. Because I just did a new two-hander of a play with Denise Welch. Well, the first thing she tells you is that she's been dry for about 11 years. I thought, this is marvellous. I thought, I've got 3 months with this woman. This is an ideal opportunity, just me and her working on this play. I will cut it out. Well, there wasn't an evening went by after the show that I wasn't wasted in the bar. So after it finished, I thought, do you know what? It's time it stopped. Because the last company I worked with started calling me Muriel Malbec. I thought, it's time to give it a rest. So I did stop. I found it very easy to stop. And I've kept it going because I found much more energy. I'm more excited about life. I find it easier to get going in the morning. And I can learn. Line learning is tricky for me now. I mean, and like the play I'm doing at the moment, this Philomena, the big learn. It's a massive learn.
So it's good for the brain, though, isn't it?
It is, but we also have to be careful about what we think we remember and what we don't. Oh, you know, and I can't remember a word for so-and-so. I can't remember your name. Or we were doing that at 30.
Yeah.
So you've not to upset yourself by saying, oh, I'm getting too loud. Or you have to be careful that really is happening to you, especially when you get to, well, I say our age. I still can't believe that we're the same. I mean,
we're in the same era, aren't we?
I know. I'm only 27. I'm not really worn very well.
No, it's interesting what you say about alcohol, because a lot of people say that when they cut down or give up, not only do they have more energy, which is absolutely true, but the days seem longer because you get more done. Do you find that?
But my dad used to say that.
Is that right?
They just seem longer because it's so boring.
You get more done. Yeah, well, it can be. No, but
You do get more.
I think you get more done.
Yes, you do.
And your mind's more alert. So
Yeah.
I think, you know, there are a lot of people doing that now, but equally, people are drinking more than they've ever done before, I think, for many
It also
years.
spares you a lot when you're out because, you know, one's not enough and two's too many.
Yeah.
And watching other people descend in the drink, which is odd because when I'm drunk, I'm rather witty and entertaining.
You are all the time.
I
all
do
the
not
time.
understand. Now, I have to tell you, the NHS, I know you want to talk about it because I do. And the reason I want to talk about it is because the NHS started in my hometown. Yes.
In Manchester? First patient, wasn't she?
Trafford General.
Yeah.
Which to me is Park Hospital, where generations of my family.
And then Iron Bevan came and saw the
Nye
first patient.
Bevan
Yeah.
was handed over the keys to the hospital. It was one of the last poor law places that was built.
Yeah.
And in 1948, but I'm so proud of that. I just think it's a marvellous thing. As a man just written a book, a man called Michael Billington has written this book with, I can't remember the name of the consultant he's written it with, but it's a history of that place where our NHS started.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at the photos they have photos of historical photos, and you can see why it's difficult to fund it now, because you look at the beds, they're like old metal bed frames, there's like curtains up at the window, the wards are all open, there's no equipment. I do believe people were encouraged to smoke them because they thought it was antiseptic.
Well, we certainly gave out Stout and Mackerson to
exactly.
patients to build them up.
Because it's good for you.
That's right. Now, it's interesting you should talk about Park Hospital, because did you ever read The Citadel by A.J. Cronin?
I did not, but I know the book.
It's a wonderful book. And that book, I wish more people would read that, because it tells the story about the health situation before 1948, before we had the NHS. And poor people just died. You know, they couldn't they couldn't afford a doctor.
Yeah.
And even if the working man, head of the family, was in some sort of cooperative, the rest of his family weren't, which is why we had so many children dying, so many women dying in childbirth. And I just wish that more people appreciated what they've got now, because they don't realise what it was like before the NHS. I do believe that people take it for granted.
I know what you're saying, but you look at beds now, and they're just a bed. It's like 60,000 quid, you know. On the other hand, we're a rich country. And there should be equality. So there should equality in health more than anything else. However, I also believe it is incumbent upon us to try and be healthy ourselves so we don't finish up in hospital. And that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
And of course, poverty creates ill health, as we all know.
Inequalities, yeah, absolutely. That was Matthew Kelly. Now, laughter, they say, is the best medicine, and I've had the pleasure of welcoming two very funny guests onto the show. Gyles Brandreth has had an eclectic career. He was a Member of Parliament for the City of Chester during John Major's government and held several senior roles. He's also the former European Monopoly champion and honorary president of the Association of British Scrabble Players. He's also a wonderful storyteller. You can watch the full interview on our YouTube page. But in this clip, I asked Gyles if he still held the world record for after-dinner speaking.
That is correct. And I haven't dared check whether or not the record is still mine, because I've got such a competitive instinct within me that I fear if somebody has beaten my record, I'd want to return to the fray. And I don't think my family, particularly my wife, could cope with that. So whether or not I hold the record, I did once. I established a modern record by talking for about 3.5 hours after dinner once. And then it was taken from me by my friend, Nicholas Parsons, raising some money for a charity. So raising some money for another charity, I then beat him. And then this charity said, why don't you do it in adjacent rooms? And we did it at the Hyde Park Hotel in adjacent rooms. We both talked non-stop for 11 hours. And at the end of the 11 hours, a note was passed up to me saying, "We suggest, we're doing this for a medical charity, that you both stop now. It probably isn't good for your health to go on any longer." Well, I wanted to go on, but Nicholas was ready to throw in the towel, so I felt obliged to throw in the towel as well. So we shared the record for a while. And then, because I couldn't sleep at night, I couldn't just face the fact that I was sharing a world record, sharing a place in the Guinness Book of Records with somebody else, I went solo. And the real challenge, when I did the 12.5 hour stint, was being able to go for 12.5 hours without a comfort break. Now, you being a medical man can tell me what is natural. I was then younger than I am now, but we had 3 children. And I discovered soon after giving birth to these 3 children, well, my wife did the giving birth, but I was involved, I was there, nights became broken. And I'd got into the habit of going to the loo at about 2 a.m. And I knew that I'd then be speaking, but I knew that the urge, because it always came on me, would come on me. And I wondered what I was going to do. And I was doing this in aid of a charity called the National Playing Fields Association, of which the then Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, the late Queen's husband, was the president. And he said, "It's not a problem." I said, "Really?" I said, "I've got to." He said, "Not a problem. You'll be wearing the appliance, won't you?" I said, "What's the appliance, sir?" He said, "Well, picture those elderly field marshals on the parade ground for hours on end, cold wind whistling around the nether regions. They don't leave the podium, do they? They don't leave the parade ground to relieve themselves. They just carry on where they are. They're wearing the appliance." So on his recommendation, I went down to John Bell and Croydon, medical suppliers, Wimpole Street, and got myself kitted out with this appliance, which was a hideous piece of rubber tubing that you attached to your nether regions. And amazing capacity. I mean, pints, and I think about 8 pints. You could have cystitis with this with pleasure. Anyway, I put it on. I went along and I spoke through the night. And about 2 a.m, I thought, well, now's the moment. I'm really ready for this. And I thought, well, of course, I haven't given it a dry run. What am I going to do? Well, I
dry run.
Thank you. I was frightened that it would make a terrible noise because I'd not tried it out. Anyway, I thought I'll tell a joke, and on the laugh, that's when I'll let go. And I told the joke because I was nervous. It didn't get the laugh, didn't tell it properly, but I still let go. And then I glanced down, and I saw snaking out of my trouser leg this hideous rubber pink tubing, making its way across the stage. I mean, it had slipped its moorings. The appliance had slipped its moorings. And as a result of this, now this, you, the medical man, can explain all this to me. As a result of this, I staunched the flow and kept on talking, talked for 12.5 hours. And then when it was over, I found I was unable to go to the loo, or is the phrase micturate that you professionals use?
So you had urinary retention, as we call it, and it's very painful.
For about 48 hours.
Wow.
And I think I had to go to the doctor and get a pill or something to sort of release it.
Finally, a man who brought along not one, but several guests when he joined me in November. He's one of the country's top impressionists, appearing regularly on Radio 4 and starring in a new one-man show, Imposter Syndrome. I asked John Culshaw about the skill of mastering so many voices.
Well, if you try to describe it, it's amazing how confusing it really is. I suppose you're looking for the things that you can exaggerate and make funny and stretch an audio caricature.
Yeah.
So you look at certain people, and to learn the voice, you just got to watch them over and over and over again. So it's really there on your subconscious. And you can see the person in your mind's eye. And as you speak, if the sound and the vision match, then you're okay.
Yeah.
Then it sort of goes along.
And does it come naturally to you eventually, or do you have to play it back? Do you record it and play it back and listen to yourself?
There's no doubt all of that does help. A lot of it is very natural and very instinctive. You'll know within yourself when you're kind of comfortable with it. But it really does help when you listen back to some recordings, some Dead Ringers shows, and you actually hear it in a detached way. It gives you another dimension that adds to the whole feel of it.
Yeah. I suppose most of us can do one accent. There's somebody we can impersonate if it's even as a family member.
Yeah.
But to go from one to the other, so quickly. I mean, that is a real talent.
Once you've got them in your mind, it's a bit like changing gear in the back of your neck somehow. And it's, you could have Professor Brian Cox going at this gentle velocity, talking about Jupiter, to Patrick Moore, talking about Uranus, very, very quickly indeed.
Yeah.
Or perhaps David Attenborough with these wonderfully inspiring gestures as he speaks about the planet on which we live. To Ozzy Osbourne, I like the extremes one to the other. That kind. I'm just sort of putting a bit of a final coat on Keir Starmer at the moment. To get to him, you've got to start at Ed Miliband, who is the voice that comes from deepest down in the diaphragm. Way down here. Look what I say. What I say is we'll raise that up, speed it up, and add some paint thinners. And then you get into that Starmer area. A bit turgid and a bit like that, and it's still under review, but it's downloading in.
I'm trying to work out why it's so funny, but it's hilarious. I mean, it's such an art, and I'm in awe of how you can do that, to change your voice, and as well as the mannerisms. You obviously enjoy it. It's something that is is a passion for you.
It's a sort of happy, mischievous, impudent thing to do. And when I was a lad around the dinner table at home, I'd take off the neighbours and teachers and my mum and dad's friends, and it just made everybody jolly, and laughter got going.
Absolutely.
I thought, this is nice. I'll carry on.
So do you have a favourite? I mean, do you have some favourites?
Oh gosh, yes, I suppose you do. I've always got a soft spot for Frank Bruno.
Because the great depth in there, it's a very, great depth in there. And, he's got this, when you speak with Frank, he's got this great, philosophy, but Tyson coming onto you like a harbour shark, just show no fear, just weather the storm,
Boxers, 90s boxers, I always love.
Eubank with that great sense of precision. And for those who bet on Nigel Benn is a very fierce competitor, and I must be at my greatest to withstand.
What makes somebody difficult to impersonate? Is there a voice or an accent that is blander and more difficult?
Yeah, I suppose some of the more grey and more disposable politicians. David Cameron was always a bit, not a lot to go on, just, generic posh and a repeated hand gesture and that sort of thing. Well, there's time's gone on now. There's that little bit of maturity at the back of the voice. It's gone a little bit like that, slightly more to get hold of, that kind of thing. Keir Starmer, I'm just in the docking procedure of getting him away from Ed Miliband at the moment. So that's sort of midway through. But yes, it's just blandness. Spitting Image always solved this problem by giving a character a trait that they didn't have, but which kind of suited them. For instance, if they had, Norman Tebbit was given sort of punk leather gear and a motorbike, because it sort of somehow resonated. And John Major was there. He was the colour of blue tack. Yes, exactly. One has to be. Sometimes you have voice neighbours. John Major, the puppet, was like this. If you go too far over this way, he became Julian Clary. So you try to repair it to John Major again, but don't go this far, otherwise it goes back to Michael Caine. Phosphorus.
That's brilliant. But it's so very clever. One of my favourites that you did was Russell Crowe.
Oh yes,
Gladiator.
Yes, exactly. Yes, the scowl, that Ridley Scott language. Quintus, feel the earth with me. What we do in life echoes in eternity. And then when I sort of let that slip and my Lancashire accent comes through, it becomes Les Dawson again. Les Dawson, yes. My dear mother-in-law, she didn't have tonsils, she had a fan belt.
Love it. So clearly you're extremely busy and in great demand, but you look fit. Do you keep healthy? What sort of routine do you have?
I think so. I used to do a lot of running, a lot of weights. I don't tend to do that quite as much these days. Long walks are the thing. I'll if I travel from London to Lancashire, I'll maybe take the train to Liverpool and take a local train and then walk for an hour and a half to get back the rest of the way.
That's good.
So I do things like that. If ever I see a bottle of green stuff in a cafe or something, I think that's probably good. So I have lots of that.
Not absinthe then.
Maybe, well, sometimes we can grant ourselves that.
Absolutely.
So I do my best. Yeah, as you get, I'm 56 now. So
Looking good on it.
Well, I don't have the same escape velocity that I used to have, in your late 20s or 30s. So now, for instance, I certainly wouldn't have chips and gravy on the way home from the pub.
No.
Certainly wouldn't do that, not at night. I certainly wouldn't I'd have pizzas maybe, I don't know, no more than twice a year.
Okay.
So I'm aware of all of that, because you don't get the escape velocity from it.
Have you had any serious medical issues, operations, or anything you can talk about?
I had some. I've had some hernia operations, some inguinal hernias.
Oh yes, haven't we all?
Yes, I think so. We used to have. I used to do a Saturday job at an electrical shop, and it was my job to lug the washer dryers to the front of the door.
Yes.
And I eventually got a hernia on one side with that. That was back in 1986. That was 3 days in hospital. And then I had another one on the other side in 1999. And it was interesting to note how technology and techniques had improved. By 1999, I went to a place called the British Hernia Centre, which was a done-up house somewhere off the North Circular Road. And I was in and out over lunchtime. And that was that.
Fantastic. Did they use a mesh? They called them?
Yes, I think so.
Mesh.
I didn't look, to be honest.
No,
I didn't know what was going on.
No,
but a very learned surgeon sorted it all out.
Excellent.
I seem to get hernias. I've got a moderate hiatus hernia.
Yeah.
So I used to get quite a bit of heartburn and that kind of thing. Although now I try the intermittent fasting. So I'll have a big breakfast, a smallish lunch, and then I'll leave it for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And that's cured it. I don't, less intake, and I don't get the same
Plus no
acid.
chips and gravy on the way back from the pub. That
Yes,
probably
exactly.
contributes as well.
I might do it I might do that over lunchtime, but the later in the day, eating big before sleep, doesn't tend to agree.
That's right. Well, we ought to have our little treats every now and again. Did you take any medicines or supplements?
Supplements I try to take, those little green pellets that look like, that look like anti-slug things.
Oh yeah. Maybe they are.
Hope I'm getting the right bottle.
I always love it when patients tell me I take those little pink pills, and there's probably 100 different ones.
Yeah.
You think, well, what could that be?
Jelly tots, they're called.
Jelly tots, of course they are. Fantastic.
So I take a few vitamins if I just see them and think they might do me some good.
Do some good, yeah.
I take a blood pressure tablet these days. I take one every day. My blood pressure's always been quite high.
Well, I'm not surprised. The stuff that you do on stage in front of audiences, it must be quite stressful. How do you deal with that?
You just get along with it. You just get, as you go along and you get more experience, you're able to, I think, get a mindset on what the stress is. And it probably shows that you care about what you're doing. And if you can channel that stress to make it uplift you rather than distract you, then I think that's the way to go with it.
And of course, the walking that you do is going to help that, because exercise, will bring down your blood pressure, relaxes the blood vessels after you finish the exercise.
Oh, good.
And keep it down, most of the time when you're not exercising. So that's really important.
This is great to be here talking about health issues.
My thanks to Brian Cox, Ozzy Osbourne, Frank Bruno and Sir Keir Starmer, and of course John Culshaw. And thanks to all my guests who joined me in 2024. We've got plenty of celebrities lined up for 2025, ready to share their personal health stories. Plus, we'll continue to bring you medical advice and facts that you could trust from the top health experts from all over the world. A reminder that you can watch all of the shows and interviews so far on my YouTube page. The best gift that you can give yourself, remember, this Christmas is the gift of good health. Subscribe right now and you'll get up-to-date best medical news and wellness tips every week. Click that button right now and take the first step towards a healthier, happier you in 2025. And for more information, links and advice, follow the show notes at drhillaryjones.com. From me and all of the team, have a really happy Christmas and a healthy new year.